The dark psychology of men who escape society's control. What if I told you that the most dangerous man is not the one who seeks power, but the one who walks away from it? Not because he's weak, but because he's already seen what lies behind the curtain. He's seen the machinery of society, the gears turning, the illusions flashing, the scripts handed out to every man at birth. And instead of playing the game, instead of fighting for dominance in a hierarchy he didn't choose, he steps outside of it entirely. That man is not broken. He is not lost. He is free. And yet, society fears him, not because he's violent, but because he's uncontrollable. He cannot be bribed with status. He cannot be seduced by praise. He cannot be imprisoned by shame. This is the dark psychology of the man who escapes society's control. We need to talk about this, because this man is becoming more common. But you may even feel him waking up inside yourself. There's a growing silence among certain men, a silence that isn't depression, but detachment. A pulling away from the noise, from the narrative, from the endless chase of success as defined by others. These men aren't lazy. They're not nihilistic. They're done pretending. They've realized the game was rigged, not in the sense of conspiracy, but in the deeper sense that the rewards society offers are often distractions from the truth of who we are. Titles, likes, promotions, applause, they're all forms of external validation meant to keep you striving outward, never looking inward. But once a man looks inward long enough, he begins to see through the mask. He realizes he was never meant to be an employee of someone else's dream. He starts asking dangerous questions. Why do I need to be productive all the time? Why do I seek validation from people I don't respect? Why am I living a life that feels like someone else's idea of success? And when those questions take root, something begins to die. The obedient version of him. The version that woke up to be a cog in a machine. The version that accepted mediocrity because it was safe. That version begins to dissolve. And in its place, something ancient reawakens, something primal.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's where the psychology gets dark. Because society doesn't know what to do with this man. He cannot be marketed to. He doesn't respond to fear-mongering. He doesn't crave the spotlight. In a world that thrives on dopamine addiction and algorithmic manipulation, he becomes invisible. And that invisibility is his power. But it's also his curse. Because once you step out of society's control, you also step out of society's compassion. People stop understanding you. Some fear you. Some envy you. Most ignore you. You become a ghost watching the world chase illusions you've already outgrown. And yet, this isolation is not punishment. It is purification. In solitude, this man begins to rebuild himself not in the image of culture, but in the image of truth. He reads, not to impress, but to understand. He trains, not for aesthetics, but for resilience. He creates, not for applause, but because he must. Life becomes internal, self-regulated, centered. He becomes dangerous, not because he seeks to destroy, but because he no longer needs anything from the system that once owned him. You can't manipulate a man who needs nothing. You can't control a man who has found peace in solitude. And yet, here's the paradox. This man did not begin as a rebel. Most of the time, he began as a good man, loyal, empathetic, eager to contribute. He tried to play by the rules. He tried to be what they told him to be: a provider, a protector, a producer. But the rules kept changing. The praise never came. The meaning never arrived. And so, slowly, he began to detach, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. He saw that the game he was playing was rigged not to make him powerful, but to make him useful. And there's a difference. Society doesn't want powerful men. It wants men who think they're powerful while remaining fundamentally dependent. They're dependent on praise, on institutions, on approval, on women, on systems, on being needed. But the man who escapes all of that, who finds inner mastery, he becomes a threat to the entire structure. So let me ask you something. What would happen if you stopped trying to be understood? What if you stopped trying to be seen, to be praised, to be praised, to be chosen? What if you walked away, not in anger, but in clarity? What if you became ungovernable not through rebellion, but through self-sufficiency? What kind of man would you become if you stopped performing and started becoming? That's the question most men never ask. Because the moment you ask it, everything starts to unravel. Your job may become meaningless. Your relationships may feel shallow. Your goals may seem artificial because they were never yours to begin with. They were given to you, installed like software. And the only way out is through a psychological death. You must let the old version of yourself burn, the obedient version, the performative version, the one who was so desperate to fit in that he forgot how to stand alone. And when that version dies, something remarkable happens. But you don't become less human, you become more. You stop living from a place of reaction and start living from a place of intention. You stop chasing peace and start embodying it. And ironically, by escaping society's control, you become the very thing society claims to want but secretly fears, a man who thinks for himself. The sacred drift, why powerful men vanish into the wilderness before they return transformed there, comes a moment, sometimes slowly, but sometimes suddenly, when a man who has awakened to the illusion of control feels a pull that he cannot explain. It's not a desire for adventure, not a craving for novelty. It's deeper than that. It's a gravitational shift in the soul, a call to disappear, to drift, to vanish from the world that once defined him. And this isn't about escape in the way modern culture talks about it: vacations, retreats, or digital detoxes. No, this is something ancient, something sacred. This is the sacred drift, the spiritual migration into the unknown, into solitude, into the wilderness of the self. It is how powerful men are reforged before they are ever revealed. Look at mythology. Look at history. Look at every spiritual tradition that has endured. The pattern is always there. The warrior, the prophet, the seeker, they all vanish before they emerge. Moses goes into the desert. Buddha leaves the palace. Christ retreats to the wilderness. Muhammad finds the cave. Jung builds a tower in the woods. Even the modern icons, think of Steve Jobs in India or David Goggins in isolation, go through this phase. Why? Because the drift is not about leaving the world. It's about detaching from the false world long enough to discover the real one that lives inside you. But the modern man has been trained to fear the drift. He's been told that if he stops producing, he loses value. If he stops performing, he becomes invisible. If he stops moving, he falls behind. So he clings desperately to routines, to titles, to relationships that no longer nourish him. He stays busy, not because he's purposeful, but because he's afraid of stillness. And yet, deep down he feels it. That whisper, that subtle ache. The soul saying, this isn't it. There's something else, something deeper, something real. The sacred drift doesn't come with a map. That's the point. It's not a guided tour. It's not a curated spiritual experience. It's terrifying. Because when you drift, you lose the mirrors that once reflected you. You lose the applause. You lose the narrative. You lose the roles you've been playing. And with that, you lose the ego's favorite toy's certainty, significance, control. What you're left with is truth. Raw, unfiltered, unedited truth. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you believe when no one is telling you what to believe? What do you value when there is no one left to impress? This is the crucible. This is where the drift does its work. It strips away everything you thought you were, so you can become what you truly are. And that process is brutal. It will break you. It will humiliate you. It will take every identity you've built with your achievements and grind it into dust. But if you stay in it, if you don't run back to the comfort of performance, you'll begin to feel something new. Not happiness, not excitement, something better, peace. A peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. A peace that comes from alignment, from wholeness, from being, not doing. And then something miraculous happens. You return, but not as who you were. You return as who you became. You re-enter the world not to seek approval, but to serve. Not to climb ladders, but to build foundations. Not to perform, but to embody. The man who returns from the drift is unrecognizable not because he's changed his clothes or his habits, but because he's changed his center. He no longer orbits around culture. Culture orbits around him. And here's the part no one tells you. Most people won't understand what happened to you. They'll sense it, but they won't be able to name it. Some will be drawn to it. Others will be threatened. That's okay. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be aligned. You're here to build from a place of clarity the world cannot give you and therefore cannot take away. So let me ask you, what would happen if you answered the call to drift? If you left the noise behind long enough to hear your soul speak? What would you find in the silence? And more importantly, what would you become when you returned? The sacred drift is not a detour. It's a rite of passage, and few make it through. But for those who do, life is never the same. Because once you've tasted your own truth, no one else's story can ever imprison you again. The invisible empire within, how self-mastery makes you immune to external control. There's a kind of power that doesn't make noise. It doesn't flex. It doesn't broadcast itself on social media. But it doesn't need to. This power lives deep inside the man who has gone through the sacred drift, the man who has faced himself in solitude and returned not as a servant of culture, but as the architect of his own being. This power cannot be bought, cannot be taught, and cannot be taken. It is the invisible empire within, and once you build it, you become immune to external control. Let's be honest, most people are ruled by things outside themselves. Their moods are at the mercy of algorithms. Their values are outsourced to media. Their goals are borrowed from others. Even their sense of identity is fragile, shifting with whatever feedback they receive. This is not sovereignty. This is slavery disguised as participation. And you can see it in the way people live: nervous, reactive, easily offended, always seeking consensus. When a man has no inner empire, he becomes a citizen of every passing trend, a subject of every dominant narrative. He moves with the wind because he has no weight of his own. Self-mastery is the antidote to this. But it's not glamorous. It's not about hacks or morning routines or productivity rituals. It's about building a foundation so deep within yourself that the world can no longer shake you. It starts with discipline, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that liberates. Discipline is not about control. It's about focus. It's the ability to say no to distraction, not because you're rigid, but because you're clear. It's the refusal to trade long-term alignment for short-term comfort. It's the daily practice of saying, I choose who I become, no matter what the world says I should be. But discipline alone is not enough. You need something deeper, awareness. Self-awareness is the throne of the inner empire. Without it, everything collapses. You must learn how to observe your own mind, not to control it, but to understand it. Most men are possessed by their thoughts. They never question them. They never challenge the source. They feel something and assume it's true. They think something and assume it's real. But the man who masters awareness becomes untouchable. He doesn't react, he chooses. He doesn't obey his emotions, he listens to them, learns from them, and then moves with intention. That's what makes him dangerous. Not because he's aggressive, but because he's grounded. And then comes the final layer, inner authority. This is the hardest to claim because society trains us from birth to defer, to teachers, to bosses, to experts, to systems. But the man who has built his inner empire stops looking outward for permission. He becomes the one who decides what is moral, what is meaningful, and what is worthy of his energy. That doesn't mean he's arrogant. It means he's anchored. He still listens. He still learns. But he filters everything through the lens of his own sovereignty. That's rare. That's sacred. And that's why it threatens the world. Because a man who governs himself cannot be governed by fear. He doesn't need approval. He doesn't collapse under pressure. He doesn't follow rules that don't make sense. He doesn't sell his soul for applause. He plays the game of life, not to win trophies, but to express truth. And that kind of man, quiet, focused, unapologetically aligned, is a revolution in human form. Not because he seeks to overthrow the world, but because he no longer belongs to it. So let me ask you, where are you still asking for permission? Where are you still outsourcing your values? Where is your allegiance to comfort keeping you from becoming sovereign? The empire within is not made of stone. It's not made of wealth or recognition. It's made of choices, tiny, deliberate, repeated choices. What you feed your mind, what you tolerate in your behavior, what you say yes to, what you walk away from. Every decision is a brick. Every act of awareness is a pillar. Every moment of discipline is a wall. And eventually, if you're ruthless enough with your honesty, if you're faithful enough to your integrity, you wake up one day and realize they can't touch me anymore. You may still live in the world. You may still work a job, pay taxes, shake hands, but internally you're untouchable. You've built something sacred, something silent, something eternal. And no one, not the media, not culture, not even your past, can take it away. That is the invisible empire, and it is the only one worth ruling. The final ascent, why true freedom begins when you no longer fear being alone. There is a final test, that every man must face before he can truly be free. It doesn't come with drums or fireworks. No one announces it. There's no audience, no reward, and no applause. It comes quietly, often in the middle of an ordinary life. And it asks a single, brutal question: can you stand alone? Not for a moment, not for a weekend retreat, but for as long as it takes for your soul to stabilize, for your mind to clear, for your identity to root itself in something deeper than society's mirrors. The final ascent of freedom is not about conquering the world. It's about conquering solitude. Most people aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of what they'll find when there's no one around to distract them. When the noise dies down, when the scrolling stops, when the masks fall off what's left. That's the real fear. Not the absence of company, but the presence of self. And for most, that presence is unfamiliar. It's raw. It's unfiltered. It's full of questions we've avoided for years. Why am I here? What do I truly want? Who am I without my job, my relationships, my roles? And that's why society is designed to keep you busy. Because stillness is dangerous to the system. Stillness makes you aware. And awareness makes you sovereign. But if you can't be alone with yourself, you'll always be dependent on others for validation, identity, and direction. You'll keep returning to the crowd not because you belong there, but because you fear the silence that comes when they leave. You'll keep selling your truth for approval, your time for distraction, your soul for company. But the man who has completed the sacred drift, who has built his invisible empire, knows better. He's passed through the fire of isolation and found that it doesn't kill you. It frees you. It clarifies. It strips away the noise until all that's left is essence. And in that essence you find something that no one else can give you: inner companionship. You become your own witness, your own guide, your own sanctuary. And from that place, your actions no longer come from need, they come from choice. This is the paradox. Only when you no longer fear being alone are you truly capable of relationship. Only when you no longer need attention are you worthy of respect. But only when you no longer depend on a system can you offer something of actual value to it. Because you're no longer trying to survive within it. You're creating from beyond it. So how does this look in real life? It means you no longer chase people who don't see you. You no longer argue to defend your truth. You no longer beg for recognition. You walk away from drama, from noise, from environments that require you to shrink. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because you've simply remembered who you are. And you refuse to forget again. You begin to live with a kind of quiet intensity. But you say less, but every word carries weight. You do less, but every action has intention. You stop trying to convince the world of your worth, because you've already convinced yourself. And in doing so, you become the rarest thing in modern life, a man who is whole. And this wholeness? It's magnetic, not in the superficial, charismatic way, but in the way that mountains are magnetic, in the way that oceans are magnetic. You become a presence that people feel before they understand. And those who are still trapped in performance may resist you. But those who are ready to rise will find you and recognize you. So let me ask you, what are you still clinging to because you're afraid of being alone? What would fall away if you sat in silence long enough to hear your soul speak clearly? And what would rise from the ashes if you trusted yourself more than the world around you? Because that's the final ascent, not the mountain of status. not the peak of achievement, but the summit of self. The place where nothing owns you, nothing haunts you, nothing defines you except your own presence. And from that summit you finally see you were never lost. You were only distracted, and now you're home, whole, free,